The Templo Mayor was one of the main temples of the Aztecs in their capital city of Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City. Its architectural style belongs to the late post-classic period of Mesoamerica. The temple was called the Hueteocalli in the Nahuatl language and dedicated simultaneously to two gods, Huitzilopochtli, god of war, and Tlaloc, god of rain and agriculture, each of which had a shrine at the top of the pyramid with separate staircases. The spire in the center of the image to the right was devoted to Calcotl in his form as the wind god, Ahecatl. The great temple devoted to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, measuring approximately 100 by 80 meters at its base, dominated the sacred precinct. Construction of the first temple began sometime after 1325, and it was rebuilt 6 times after that. The temple was destroyed by the Spanish in 1521. The modern-day archaeological site lies just to the northeast of the Zocalo, or main plaza of Mexico City, in the block between Seminario and Justo Sierra Streets. The site is part of the historic center of Mexico City, which was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1987. Discovery and excavation. After the destruction of Tenochtitlan, the Templo Mayor, like most of the rest of the city, was taken apart and then covered over by the new Spanish colonial city. The temple's exact location was forgotten, although by the 20th century scholars had a good idea where to look for it. This was based on the archaeological work done at the end of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th. Leopoldo Batres did some excavation work at the end of the 19th century under the Mexico City Metropolitan Cathedral because at this time, the temple was thought to be there. In the first decades of the 20th century, Manuel Gamio found part of the southwest corner of the temple and his finds were put on public display. However, it did not generate great public interest in excavating further as the zone was an upper-class residential area. In 1933, Emilio Cuevas found part of a staircase and beam. In 1948, Hugo Moedano and Elmer Estrada Balmora excavated a platform containing serpent heads and offerings. In 1966, Eduardo Contreras and George Angular excavated a chest containing offerings that was first explored by Gamio. However, the push to fully excavate the site did not come until late in the 20th century. On the 25th of February 1978, workers for the electric company were digging at a place in the city then popularly known as the Island of the Dogs. It was named such because it was slightly elevated over the rest of the neighborhood, and when there was flooding, street dogs would congregate there. At just over 2 meters down they struck a pre-Hispanic monolith. This stone turned out to be a huge disc of over 3.25 meters in diameter, 30 centimeters thick and weighing 8.5 metric tons. The relief on the stone was later determined to be Caolxauhqui, the moon goddess, dating to the end of the 15th century. From 1978 to 1982, specialists directed by archaeologist Eduardo Matos Moctezuma worked on the project to excavate the temple. Initial excavations found that many of the artifacts were in good enough condition to study. Efforts coalesced into the Templo Mayor project, which was authorized by presidential decree. To excavate, 13 buildings in this area had to be demolished. 9 of these were built in the 1930s and 4 dated from the 19th century, and had preserved colonial elements. During excavations, more than 7,000 objects were found, mostly offerings including effigies, clay pots in the image of Tlaloc, skeletons of turtles, frogs, crocodiles, and fish, snail shells, coral, some gold, alabaster, Mixtec figurines, ceramic urns from Veracruz, masks from what is now Guerrero State, copper rattles, decorated skulls and knives of obsidian and flint. These objects are housed in the Templo Mayor Museum. This museum is the result of the work done since the early 1980s to rescue, preserve and research the Templo Mayor, its sacred precinct and all objects associated with it. The museum exists to make all of the finds available to the public. Earlier versions. The excavated site consists of two parts: the temple itself, exposed and labeled to show its various stages of development, along with some other associated buildings, and the museum, built to house the smaller and more fragile objects. Mexican pyramids were typically expanded by building over prior ones, using the bulk of the former as a base for the latter. As later rulers sought to expand the temple to reflect the growing greatness of the city of Tenochtitlan. Therefore, digging down through this pyramid takes us back in time. The first temple was begun by the Aztecs the year after they founded the city, and the pyramid was rebuilt 6 times after that. Construction of the first Templo Mayor began sometime after 1325. This first pyramid is only known through historical records, as the high water table of the old lakebed prevents excavation. According to these records, the first pyramid was built with earth and perishable wood, which may not have survived to the present time. The second temple was built during the reigns of Akamapictli, Huichilihuitl and Kaimalpopoca between 1375 and 1427. The upper part of this temple has been excavated, exposing 2 stone shrines covered in stucco on the north side. A chakmul was uncovered as well. On the south side there is a sacrificial stone called the Tchcatl, and a sculptured face. The third temple was built between 1427 and 1440 during the reign of Itzcoatl. A staircase with 8 stone standard-bearers is from this stage, bearing the glyph with the year. 4 read these standard-bearers act as divine warriors, guarding the access to the upper shrines. The fourth temple was constructed between 1440 and 1481 during the reigns of Moctezuma I and Axayacatl. This stage is considered to have the richest of the architectural decorations as well as sculptures. Most offerings from the excavations are from this time. The great platform was decorated with serpents and braziers, some of which are in the form of monkeys and some in the form of Tlaloc. At this time, the stairway to the shrine of Tlaloc was defined by a pair of undulating serpents, and in the middle of this shrine was a small altar defined by a pair of sculpted frogs. The circular monolith of Kayolgzorki also dates from this time. The fifth temple is dated during the short reign of Tizoc. During these 5 years the platform was recovered in stucco and the ceremonial plaza was paved. The sixth temple was built during the reign of Ahauxotl. He finished some of the updates made by Tizoc and made his own, as it's shown on the carvings of the commemoration stone of the Huateocalli, showing the Tutelatoque celebrating the opening of the temple during the last day of the month Panquetzalitztli, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, day 7. ACATL of the year 8 ACATL. The sacred precinct was walled off and this wall was decorated with serpent heads. He built 3 shrines and the House of the Eagle Warriors. At the inauguration of this great temple, Ahauxotl ordered the sacrifice of many prisoners of war. Some 4,000 victims were reportedly sacrificed over a 4-day period. Each day blood ran like a river onto the pavement of the Great Plaza, and the stairs of the Great Pyramid were literally bathed in blood. Final version. The 7th and last temple is what Hernan Cortés and his men saw when they arrived to Tenochtitlan in 1519. Very little of this layer remains because of the destruction the Spaniards wrought when they conquered the city. Only a platform to the north and a section of paving in the courtyard on the south side can still be seen. Most of what is known about this temple is based on the historical record. It was at the time the largest and most important active ceremonial center. Fray Bernardino de Sahagun reports the sacred precinct as having 78 buildings. However, the Templo Mayor towered above all of them. The pyramid was composed of 4 sloped terraces with a passage between each level, topped by a great platform that measured approximately 80 by 100 meters. It had 2 stairways to access the 2 shrines on the top platform. One was dedicated to Tlaloc, the god of water, on the left side, and one to Huitzilopochtli, deity of war and of the sun, on the right side. The two temples were approximately 60 meters in height, and each had large braziers where the sacred fires continuously burned. The entrance of each temple had statues of robust and seated men which supported the standard-bearers and banners of handmade bark paper. Each stairway was defined by balustrades flanking the stairs, terminating in menacing serpent heads at the base. These stairways were used only by the priests and sacrificial victims. The entire building was originally covered with stucco and polychrome paint. The deities were housed inside the temple, shielded from the outside by curtains. The idol of Huitzilopochtli was modeled from amaranth seeds held together with honey and human blood. Inside of him were bags containing jade, bones and amulets to give life to the god. This figure was constructed annually, and it was richly dressed and fitted with a mask of gold for his festival held during the Aztec month of Panquetzalitztli. At the end of the festival, the image was broken apart and shared among the populace to be eaten. In his description of the city, Cortés records that he and the other Spaniards were impressed by the number and magnificence of the temples constructed in Tenochtitlan, but that was tempered by this disdain for their beliefs and human sacrifice. On 14 November 1519, Cortés seized the Emperor Moctezuma II and ordered the destruction of all the religious relics of the Aztecs. He ordered a Catholic cross placed on the Templo Mayor. While Cortés left for Veracruz to confront Spaniards looking to arrest him, Pedro de Alvarado learned of a plan to attack the Spaniards, and staged a preemptive attack on the Aztecs in the sacred precinct while they celebrated a religious festival. Unarmed and trapped within the walls of the sacred precinct, an estimated 8,000–10,000 Aztec nobles were killed. When word of the massacre spread throughout the city, the people turned on the Spaniards, killing 7, wounding many, and driving the rest back to their quarters. The Spaniards were trapped between two Aztec forces and 68 were captured alive. 10 of these Spanish captives were immediately sacrificed at the temple and their severed heads were thrown back to the Spaniards. The others were sacrificed at the Great Temple that night, which could be seen from the Spanish camps. The sacrificed Spaniards were flayed and their faces, with beards attached, were tanned and sent to allied towns, both to solicit assistance and to warn against betraying the alliance. After the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521, the lands controlled by the Aztecs became part of the Spanish Empire. All the temples, including the Templo Mayor, were sacked, taking all objects of gold and other precious materials. Cortés, who had ordered the destruction of the existing capital, had a Mediterranean-style city built on the site. Essential elements of the old imperial center, including the Templo Mayor, were buried under similarly key features of the new Spanish city in what is now the historical downtown of the Mexico City. The Templo Mayor and Sacred Precinct were demolished and a Spanish church, later the main cathedral, was built on the western half of the precinct. Symbolism. According to tradition, the Templo Mayor is located on the exact spot where the god Huitzilopochtli gave the Mexica people his sign that they had reached the Promised Land, an eagle on an opal cactus with a snake in its mouth. The Templo Mayor was partially a symbolic representation of the hill of Coatepec, where according to Mexica myth, Huitzilopochtli was born. Huitzilopochtli emerged from his mother Coatlicue fully grown and fully armed to battle his sister Caolxauhqui and her brothers the Senzone, Huitznahua, who intended to kill him and their mother. Huitzilopochtli was victorious, slaying and dismembering his sister. Her body was then thrown to the bottom of the hill. As the southern half of the Great Temple represented Coatepec, the great stone disc with Caolxauhqui's dismembered body was found at the foot of this side of the temple. The northern half represented Tonacatepetl, the mountain home of Tlaloc. The sacred Bolcourt and skull rack were located at the foot of the stairs of the twin temples, to mimic, like the stone disc, where Huitzilopochtli was said to have placed the goddess' decapitated head. These locations served as a place for the reenactment of the mythical conflict. The various levels of the temple also represent the cosmology of the Aztec world. First of all, it is aligned with the cardinal directions with gates that connect to roads leading in these directions. This indicates the place where the plane of the world that humans live in intersects the 13 levels of the heavens, called Topan, and the 9 levels of the underworld, called Mictlan. Sacred precinct and surrounding buildings. Among the most important buildings were the Bolcourt, the Comcac, and the temples dedicated to Calcotl, Tezcatlipoca and the Sun. The Templo Mayor itself delineated the eastern side of the sacred precinct. On the sides of the Templo Mayor, archaeologists have excavated a number of palatial rooms and conjoining structures. One of the best preserved and most important is the Palace of the Eagle Warriors. This area dates back to the 4th stage of the temple, around 1469. It was excavated in 1981 and 1982 by José Francisco Hinojosa. It is a large L-shaped room with staircases decorated with sculptures of eagle heads. To enter this main room, one had to pass through an entrance guarded by 2 large sculpted representations of these warriors. The Eagle Warriors were a privileged class who were dedicated to the god Huitzilopochtli, and dressed to look like eagles. Adjoining this palace is the temple for these warriors, also known as the Red Temple. This temple shows clear Teotihuacan influence in its paintings and the design of its altar. Almost all the interior walls of the House of the Eagles are decorated with beautiful paintings and contain long benches, which are also painted. These benches are composed of 2 panels. The upper one is a frieze with undulating serpents in bas-relief. The lower panel shows processions of armed warriors converging on a Zacatapaioli, a grass ball into which the Mexica stuck bloody lancets during the ritual of auto-sacrifice. This palace specifically imitates much of the style of the Burnt Palace, located in the ruins of Tula. A number of important artifacts have been found in this area, the most important of which are 2 nearly identical large ceramic sculptures of Mictlantecuhtli, the god of death. Despite being found in fragile pieces, they were both reconstructed and are on display at the on-site museum. Another conjoining area was dedicated to the Ocelot warriors. Their temple, dedicated to the god Tezcatlipoca, lies under the current Museo de la Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público to the south of the Templo Mayor. The Comcac was a residence hall for priests and a school for future priests, administrators and politicians, where they studied theology, literature, history and astronomy. Its exact location is on one side of what is now Donsla Street. The Temple of Calcotl was located to the west of the Templo Mayor. It is said that during the equinox, the sun rose between the shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc and shone directly on this temple. Due to the god's serpentine nature, the temple had a circular base instead of a rectangular one. The ball field, called the Tiltli or Tuxtlachtli, was similar to many sacred ball fields in Mesoamerica. Games were played barefoot, and players used their hips to move a heavy ball to stone rings. The field was located west of the Templo Mayor, near the twin staircases and oriented east-west. Next to this ball field was the Huizumpantai, where the skulls of sacrifice victims were kept after being covered in stucco and decorated. The Temple of the Sun was located west of the Templo Mayor also, and its remains lie under the Metropolitan Cathedral. The project to shore up the cathedral at the end of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st brought to light a number of artifacts, offerings. Most of the objects found in the Templo Mayor were offerings. Although many are of Mexica design, there are also abundant items from other peoples brought in as tribute or through trade. Sculptures, flint knives, vessels, beads and other sumptuary ornaments, as well as minerals, plants and animals of all types, and the remains of human sacrifice, were among the items deposited in offerings. All of these fulfilled a specific function within the offering, depending on the symbolism of each object. In excavations at the Templo Mayor, different types of offerings have been found and have been grouped by researchers in terms of time, space, container, internal distribution and value of the items. The offerings were usually contained in cavities, in stone urns, and in boxes made of slabs. These are found under floors, in platforms, architectural bodies, stairways and in temples. These offerings were placed accompanied by complex rituals following set temporal, spatial and symbolic patterns, depending on the intention of the offering. The oldest Mexico objects, located in the Second Temple, are two urns which contain the remains of incinerated bones. One of the urns was made of obsidian and the other of alabaster. A small silver mask and a gold bell were found inside one urn, and second gold bell and two green stone beads were placed in the other. Images of the gods Huehueteotl, together with Tlaloc, presided over most of the offerings found in the Templo Mayor, representing fire and water respectively. This pair of deities probably symbolized the concept of burning water, a metaphor for warfare. Another theme exhibited in this hall is auto-sacrifice, a ritual that was conducted in private as a personal act of communication with the gods. Widespread throughout the entire population, this practice was performed by perforating certain fleshy parts of the body, such as the earlobes, lips, tongue, chest, calves, etc., with obsidian blades, agave needles or bone perforators. Once the implement was covered with blood, it was inserted in straw balls called zacatapaioli. The entirety was probably placed in ceremonial boxes, tepetlacoli, as an offering to the gods. Objects associated with human sacrifice are the face blades, or knives decorated with eyes and teeth, as well as skull masks. Other ceremonial items include musical instruments, jewelry, and braziers for the burning of copal.